Good morning, friends. Good morning, friends. Hello, hello. How are you this morning? Hope you're doing great. Hope this is a good day for you. It is beautiful outside. The first, I think, inklings of spring has that feel to it. It is, while still pretty early for all that, it is still quite beautiful, quite nice this morning. So, hope you're doing great in it. Have a little mug up this morning, little sailboat mug. Hey, good morning. Hi, Donna. Glad you're doing good. Hope Phyllis is well too. That there's a. Hope you get out in a little sunshine today. Chris Mank, everybody. How are you, brother? Excellent. So glad everybody's here today. Gonna be a good day. Good morning, everyone. Hello. All right. A few more people coming along and we'll get going. So, hey, Marianne, good morning to you. Glad you're here. Jamie, glad you're feeling a little better. Hey, Karen, good morning to you. Hope you're having a great day. Jean Lamoge, everybody. How are you, dear? Good to see you. Always a joy. All right, friends, let's get going this morning. It is the 26th day of February at this 11:11, and I'm glad you're here and a part of this journey. So this morning, so we have an event coming up tonight, and I want to talk a little bit about it. And so by doing that, I just want to tell you a few stories today. So, but we'll start by talking about what we're going to do tonight. So every quarter, about every couple months, we have what is called our all church family night. So we gather the whole church family, la-di-da-di, everybody, anybody who'd like to come and be here. We have a great meal starting at 5:30, and then at 6 o'clock we have a program of some sort. This tonight is our night for our all church family night, and tonight what we're doing is we have the executive director of what is called the Congregational Library and Archives out of beautiful Boston, Massachusetts, right down the street from the State House. And their job is to maintain the archives of the congregational tradition. So all the way back to the Pilgrims, if you don't know what that is, that's all the way back to the Pilgrims, the guys who buckles on their, so tough they had to buckle their hats on. All of that and that grand tradition that comes down to us, in which we're a part of. We are the spiritual descendants of those very pilgrims. And so this is, if you haven't noticed yet, this year is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And the thing is you don't get the American Revolution without congregational pastors and without pastors up and down throughout the 13 colonies that became to rebel against the British Crown. That in those days the church was the central place in which political life and religious life was worked out. Now things have changed a little bit, but the stories and the inheritance that we get from them, I think, is just still amazing and really kind of cool. And so I want to kind of tell you a few of those stories. Maybe you've heard them, maybe you haven't over the years, but and to talk a little bit more about kind of what that means for us today. And so the first story, comes from, it was January 21st, 1776, the beginning of the American Revolution, and there's a pastor out in Western Virginia by the name of John Muhlenberg. And he was standing, on this Sunday morning, he stood before his congregation and he preached a sermon from the third chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe you know the bird song. There is a time for every season under heaven. And so he goes through and reads the passage. There is a time to be born, a time to die. There's a time to plant, a time to harvest. And then his voice began to rise and he said, and there is a time for war and a time for peace. And he took off his black preaching robe, and underneath it was the uniform of a militia colonel. And he would go on to say, there is a time to preach and a time to pray, but there is also a time to fight. And now this time has come. And he'd been commissioned earlier that week by George Washington, and he began to, and the drum roll rang, and Muhlenberg marched out of Woodstock, Virginia, with 300 soldiers behind him that would enlist and become a part. They would fight in most of the southern campaigns, and Muhlenberg would end up a major general and one of Washington's most valued commanders by the end of the war. James Caldwell was a pastor in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. And if you don't, and New Jersey is the center of a lot of things now, but what we've forgotten is there were really, in many ways, two centers of liberty being encouraged in the new colonies. One was in Boston, as you know, and the other was actually in New Jersey. And so Caldwell he stepped into the pulpit one Sunday wearing two pistols, and he placed them on the pulpit and began to preach a powerful sermon for the need of Christians to stand for truth. And when the war began, Caldwell became a chaplain in the colonial army. I feel you, man. And he was so hated, because of the courage and the inspiration that he brought colonial soldiers that he was called. He actually had a nickname among the British called the Rebel Priest. When war finally came to Elizabethtown was actually one of the largest battles in campaigns in the Revolutionary War. When it came there, that in the midst of the fighting, that Caldwell's wife would actually be killed, and many would say they would be killed by the British in reprisal. And as the battle came after the funeral, he rejoined the battle. And during the fighting, there was when you loaded a musket in those days, you had a ball and you had powder, but in order to make a seal between the ball and the powder, you needed what was called wadding. So usually a piece of paper or something. And so the colonists on the front lines were running out of wadding. And so he ran back to one of the churches, and he grabbed up all the hymnals, and there was a Methodist church. So the hymnals in those days were all the hymns in those days were written by a guy by the name of Isaac Watts. And so he ran back to the front lines and began handing out the hymnals to his fellow soldiers, and they would tear the pages out of the hymnals and use them for wadding in their muskets. And the great cry arose, "Give 'em Watts, boys! Give 'em Watts!" And then that would actually be translated later in the war. That would be "Give 'em." One of the battle cries of the Revolution is to give 'em what for, which is kind of a play on give 'em Watts. The third story I want to tell you today is that of the one that's closer to home, and that great idea of the ride of Paul Revere. Paul Revere is famous for his ride, of course, but what we and running on April 18th, 1775, it's going to be the 250th anniversary this year. There's actually there is a big procession that you can actually join. They're going to recreate the ride. They kind of do it every year, but this year is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a Friday night. Be a good time for everybody. And so but the thing is there's the pastor that doesn't always get talked about. So there's pastor, his name is Jonas Clark, and Jonas Clark is the pastor of the Lexington Church. And on Sunday afternoons, he would have over a guy by the name of Deacon John Parker, who was one of his deacons, one of the senior leaders of his church in Lexington. He and Pastor Clark would gather on his porch and then go out back, and they would begin to drill the militiamen of his church and of the surrounding area should the British arrive. And so the reason we get the shot heard round the world, which was famously fired on April 18th, or April 19th, that morning after Paul Revere's ride, the reason that shot is fired is because Pastor Clark and Deacon Parker had drilled those men to be able to stand against the British. But that night, on April 18th, he had two people staying at his house. He had two distinguished guests. Pastor Clark did. He had a fellow by the name of John Adams, or Samuel Adams, and John Hancock. As Revere rode through the front yard of Pastor Clark's home, they would run out to meet him. And Pastor Clark would run out and he'd say, "I trained for this very hour. They would fight, and if need be, to die under the shadow of the house of God." And that's just what will happen as the Minutemen gather on Lexington Green that morning. When they arrive, as the British approached the Minutemen, they cried out, "In the name of the King of England, throw down your arms!" And this response rang out from the colonists: "We recognize no sovereign but God, and no king but Jesus." And then Captain Parker said to his Minutemen, "Stand your ground and don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." And this was the first shot that rang out, what is called the shot that was heard around the world, and began the eruption of the Republic of human freedom in a way it had never been known in the world, erupted on that green, not but an hour's drive from me right now. These men of God, if you will, these congregations that would be a part of this revolution, these stories that would actually have the British again would give them all a name. They would call them the Black-Robed Regiment. These preachers that would preach rebellion from their pulpits. All of these, again, these are just but three stories. There are many, many, many others. And in all of it, they would come to bring forth this notion of human sovereignty, of human freedom, of the fact that, and again, for them, these were far less political declarations than they were spiritual ones, because what they understood, as Deacon Parker proclaimed to the British on Lexington Green, we are a people who have no sovereign, but are sovereign in heaven. Now, that doesn't mean we don't participate in the world, doesn't mean we don't pay taxes, doesn't mean we don't participate in our life or our government, and we don't have to contend with power over it. But the way in which we're created, we are created as people for whom we are responsible to God and to God alone, for whom we have been created as agents of God and God alone. Now, that doesn't mean we don't participate in the wider order of the world. It in fact means we participate in it well and true and goodly as best as we can manage to figure out how. But this sovereignty which we've been given is not up for debate. It's not up for question. It is not something that is granted by either a king or a state or even a fancy theological declaration. It is granted by our created status as human beings, that in us is the reflection of the image of God, and in you is the reflection of the image of God. And it was for them to be faithful in their time, and it's for us to be faithful in ours. And so when we gather tonight, we're going to hear some of the stories from Kyle Roberts, from the executive director of the Congregational Library. We're going to have a great meal, and we're going to hear those stories and his really assessment of kind of the impact of the Congregational Church and of what happened in those early days of revolution. Not just so we can kind of, I think, the hope is that not just so that we kind of can feel real smart about ourselves and ogle about the past, but that we can, in seeing the heroism and the courage and the power of our ancestors, well, maybe we can live a little bit of courage and a little bit of power and a little bit of life into the life that we've been given by God. So this is our hope. This is what's coming tonight. I'm looking forward to it. Kyle's a great guy and he's a good speaker. So if you're anywhere nearby, I hope you can make it on tonight. It'll be great. If you're not, I hope that you can remember that whatever seems to be weighing you down right now, whatever seems to be oppressing you, whatever feels like a boot on your neck, whether it is the state or whether it is some power that some spiritual power, whether it's some physical ailment that seems to have you down, whatever seems to be oppressing you right now, remember there is no true authority but the one who made you, and the one who loves you, and the one who calls you home, and the one who embraces you and wants to give you all good gifts. There is no king but Christ in this world. And that all of those other powers, all of those other principalities, all those other things that would afflict us, whether they are real boots on our neck or whether they are figurative ones or whether they are spiritual ones or whether they are the contending with the struggles of just being mortal and being alive, that all of them are overcome and conquered in Christ Jesus. All right, friends, that's my hope for you. That's our kind of our story time today. It is great to see everybody on our live stream today. Hey, Jane, great to see you. All right, friends, peace and grace to you all, and hope if you're anywhere nearby, hope to see you tonight. We'll pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11.